Hi, I'm Peter Tragos, host of the Lawyer You Know podcast and YouTube channel. The saying goes, everyone hates lawyers until you need one. Well, I'm here when you need one to answer your questions and give you insight that you didn't know you needed. Along with my partners, Pete Sardis, the professor, who has a finance and business background, and George Tragos, my dad, and the consigliere, a criminal defense giant, we can answer any questions you have.
All right, so a very interesting news report came out that the first not guilty verdict for a defendant in the January 6th alleged riots on the Capitol has come down. And it's a very interesting setup because we have what seems to be a bench trial, meaning the defendant chose for the judge to make the ultimate decision on his fate. And throughout this trial, there were some very interesting facts that can make us understand that when held to the criminal burden, maybe some of these alleged rioters and alleged at least trespassers were not committing a crime. And we're going to talk about those facts in today's video. So we have a judge that has found a defendant not guilty. What were the arguments the criminal defendant made? Well, first, there were videos and testimony about how law enforcement officers at the Capitol actually removed the barricades, which would indicate that these potential rioters or protesters or whatever you want to call them thought that it was okay to come into the Capitol. Number two, there was some video where at least arguably one of the officers could have been seen as waving the defendant in, saying, come on, it's okay. Go ahead and come in. Okay, which is very interesting to me. And the judge said arguably, and all the reports were that it was arguable. So it wasn't, like I'm saying, it wasn't like this. He didn't have, the air traffic control sign saying come this way, but it was at least arguable that he was waving this defendant into the Capitol. So the defendant thought it was okay. And lastly, the defendant said he had absolutely no knowledge that there was any violence, and it was more of a big block party on this magical day, as he put it. And the judge found him not guilty, but in the judge's comments, it was clear the judge didn't necessarily think that he was innocent, but instead, the judge said it's probably more likely than not, which is a civil burden, the way that juries weigh civil cases, more likely than not, or preponderance of the evidence. The judge said under that burden, this defendant is probably guilty. But close calls in criminal cases go to the criminal defendant. And basically, the prosecution could not prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Therefore, this defendant is not guilty. Now, what's very interesting, and so some of the videos we have of moving the barricades, some of the videos we have, you guys don't necessarily have or haven't seen. A lot of the video footage from inside the Capitol, where there are these CCTV cameras that were produced to the individual defendants in the case, if it applied to them, when they pinged them walking through different places in the Capitol. So this video footage was likely from some video footage that only this criminal defendant had, or the group of criminal defendants that walked through this portion, to show that the law enforcement officer potentially waved him in. But there were other people in the hallway. There were other people that could make that same argument. There were other people by the barricades when the law enforcement officers moved them. There were other people walking through where they didn't think it was violent at all. Yet a lot of them are taking plea deals. Some of them are even going to prison. So is that fair? Is that what we want? Just because we can convict people, when we see that there is some arguments to be made that maybe this, even if it was considered a bad decision, maybe it didn't rise to the level of criminal behavior. And what I want to know from you in the chat is, based on those two key factors, forget about the fact that he thought it was a block party, forget about the fact that he thought it was magical, and whether or not you agree with him or what he believes or what that side believes or this side believes, just focus on these two facts. The misdemeanors, the 4 misdemeanors I think that he was charged with, basically surrounded with trespassing and going somewhere you knew you shouldn't be, and going into a place where you knew you shouldn't be, breaking in here, right? So with those two facts, tell me which one, and you can say either or both. Do either of those facts make you agree with the judge's verdict of not guilty? And the way you can answer is putting waving, meaning the officer waving him in, or barricades, meaning the barricades being removed by law enforcement officers. Or you can let me know it's both by writing both in there. Or, of course, as is always an option, neither. If you think he should be guilty of this crime of trespassing, even though the barricades were moved and they were potentially waved in by law enforcement officers, let me know in the comments. That's really what I want to know. A jury of our peers, right? You all are potential jurors in a case like this. Let me know what you would think and what you would do if you were on the jury, even though this was a bench trial. If you were on the jury and you heard those two facts, You're charged with not being allowed to be here. Well, I thought I was allowed to be here because there were barricades and they were moved, and the officer waved me in. To me, that's definitely enough for a not guilty verdict, but I want to know what you guys think because I may be biased as a criminal defense lawyer who's handled cases in this realm. So I want to know from you all what you think. And I know we all have our own biases, but I will get in the chat now for questions, and then I will get in the chat for whether or not you think it should be a guilty or not guilty verdict based on those facts. So, Megan, how is it possible for a not guilty verdict? Well, now that you've heard it, Megan Graves, I'm going to look and see what your response is and why you either believe or agree or disagree with this judge. Yes, Betty Smith, correct. That is what he used to get off. So Megan has another question. Do you think it will affect all of the other guilty charges? So guilty charges, I think there's two ways to answer this question. So I'm going to kind of split up I'm going to nitpick your question here because words are important and definitions are important, as we always say on this channel. Will it affect the other guilty pleas or guilty verdicts? No, because the defendants waived their right to make this same argument. Now, if there's ineffective assistance of counsel and the lawyers told them there's nothing and they lied to them or something, of course. But I'm just saying, a fact like this that everybody knew or should have known about, that was publicly and easily available to them, they could have made this argument, but they take a risk because if you go lose, now you've got a conviction. You get punished in this country, even though you shouldn't, for using your constitutional right to go to trial. So likely you would have got a worse punishment. So by pleading, you get a less punishment. So that won't really affect any other guilty pleas, which always hits me hard because clients don't want to take the risk. And you can obviously understand because it goes on their record. It could affect their job. It could affect their family. It could affect their livelihood. So sometimes they take plea deals even when they think or know that they are not guilty, but they're in fear of the guilty verdict. So no, I don't think it's going to affect any of the guilty pleas. Will it affect any of the other charges, which is also in your question? It may affect some of the other charges. I think some of the after defendants are going to use the same argument, number one. Now, what's interesting about this is because there are so many of these cases, they're all assigned to different judges, not just this same federal judge. And this same federal judge is already getting hit on some of the certain media channels as being, too easy on it. And now everybody's going to go to trial in front of him and make the same argument, get not guilty verdict. So I do think it could affect future charges or the charges that have not come to trial or been pled yet. And it could affect future trials, definitely, and what arguments they make, because lawyers are famous for using other people's ideas. Famously, they say, I never want to have an original idea. I want to use the ideas that I already know works. So I do think it can affect future cases, future trials, and the charges that have not been pled to yet, absolutely. But if it's in other judges' courtrooms, maybe it won't have any effect at all. So we'll see kind of how, that's why I find it interesting exactly for this question. What kind of precedent will it set for the future cases, the future trials, the future charges that haven't come to resolution yet? All right, so Megan thinks it was more the barricades being moved, and there's a lot of video evidence of this, not just stuff we haven't seen that might be sealed, that might go to an individual defendant. So barricades for Megan changed her mind. B. Bean thinks that they still should be guilty. Don't know enough about it. Neither. He should have been convicted. Barricades and to a lesser effect, the waiving. Melina thinks guilty. JR thinks not guilty. Okay, good question by Mr. Turn Up the Party. So it was confirmed that this specific defendant was waived in, didn't do any, and I will just tell you, from a lot of the cases and video footage we've seen, the majority of the defendants that are being charged that literally walk through like you were on a tour of the Capitol. Now, of course, there were some that damaged property, hurt people, and absolutely committed crimes. This does not apply at all to them. This applies more to the people that walked in, maybe walked through some hallways, into some offices, whatever, and then walked out. Great question. Great way to nitpick me, which I love. We're really just applying this to the people that were totally nonviolent and walked through. Yeah, if they steal stuff, vandalize. Good point. All of you guys brought that up. Good job. Good catch. Should the police officer get charged for waving them in? I don't think so, and definitely because I don't think that, based on what the judge said, I don't think the state or the government could ever prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what that police officer was doing. I mean, that officer could have been doing a million things with his hand, which is why the judge said that it's arguable that the police officer was waving him in. So, Billy Bean, I will just tell you, having seen the closed caption footage from inside the Capitol, tons of hallways and offices, there was not destruction and injuries and damage going on all around these people. There was not. Now, there were certain areas where there absolutely was. But I don't think that is the case for everybody, and definitely not for this criminal defendant. Thank you, Tracy. Glad you came. All right, so that is all the questions we had on the January 6th situation. I do think it's interesting. Make sure if you're watching this video after the fact, you let me know in the comments what you think, what may have changed your mind, or why you still feel they should be guilty in this scenario. But I'm glad we really got to the nuance of it. So thanks for giving me your questions in and letting me know what you thought about the January 6th situation.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.